Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm going to give a talk titled, How Can I Move Forward When I Don't Know Where I Want to Go? The beginning of this talk, I like to do a little bit of audience participation. So if you are comfortable participating, you can raise your hand if any of the following prompts resonate with you currently, or if they have resonated with you in the past. So show of hands if this feels applicable to you, that you know exactly where you want to go in your career. You usually don't get very many hands for this one. All right, how about this one? Show of hands if you have a skill that has previously boxed you into a role that you did not enjoy. Yeah, I'm seeing some raised hands on this one for sure. Yep. All right, and then my last one is show of hands if you've experienced decision fatigue or decision paralysis. And again, either recently or in the past. Me, absolutely, for sure. So this last one is especially applicable to me, and it is a really big reason why and how this talk came to be. So hi, I'm Mo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently a senior software engineer at Spreedly, and I'm passionate about 4-day work weeks, utilizing open PTO policies, and mentorship. I have decision fatigue in so many areas of my life, and a big area is my career and my future, but I also don't want it to hold me back. So that is what we're going to talk about today, how to move forward. So disclaimer before I begin, I'm going to share a bit about my journey and how I got here. I'm not here pretending to be anyone other than a human in the tech industry that has a bit of experience climbing various ladders and learning from those adventures. I also want to recognize that I have a level of privilege and resources at my current company that have made a lot of this possible. I recognize that some of this won't be as easily attainable for others as I wish it was. But my hope is that everyone here gets something out of this talk, whether that be ideas on how to map out your next steps for professional development, nuggets of wisdom to ponder in your hearts, or motivation to explore new things that excite you. So, what are we talking about here today? I will start by giving you a bit of history about my journey, some of those different adventures and career ladders that I've climbed. Then we will get into how to map it out, what your navigation could look like, some potential roadblocks that you might find along the way, and lastly, looking ahead. What can you do with the information and resources that I'm going to throw at you today? So let's get started talking about my journey. So, well, how did I get here? I went to college in the mountains of North Carolina, which is known for their clay. We don't have very good soil in North Carolina. It is mostly clay. So I got my BFA in ceramics. Very fun endeavor to be on when I was in college. Very random piece of information about me now. I get to use it as one of those fun facts in like 2 truths and a lie type scenarios and things like that. But it is very much not a thing that I utilize anymore in my life. But I don't regret it at all. But when I graduated from college, it was very much like, okay, what am I going to, like, what do I do with this? And I had student loans that needed to be paid. So I did what a lot of folks I know did when they graduated college and just looked for the first thing that they could find. Like, not applicable to my degree at all, but I dove into the food industry. Specifically, I went into coffee. So I'm a pretty organized person just by default, and it led people to recognize that in me, and I moved into management in the coffee industry. So moving into management was kind of one of the only ways that you can move up in like the food industry. You go from being like a barista to maybe a shift leader, and then eventually you can become a store manager. And that was what that journey was like for me. But in moving into management in that industry, it also led me to burnout. And when I hit that point of burnout, it was very quickly a realization that I needed to get out of there and I needed to go into something else. So I actually found a project management role at an art consultant company which was cool because I got to use what I had been referring to as my useless art degree. I actually got to use it and talk about art in my day-to-day, which was fun and exciting. But as with my previous industry, people recognized that, oh, she's really organized and is kind of this like natural leader when put into group situations. So let's promote her and get her into management. So again, I got into management, which led to emotional burnout for me. And then that again went into this cycle of like, okay, I need to get out of here. What am I going to do next? And at that time, that was when I heard about going into software boot camps. So this was back in 2018. And I went to a software boot camp located here out of North Carolina. And that landed me into the tech industry. And so I got my first job in tech in April of 2019, and off she goes. So that's a bit about how I got into tech and like my career, my professional career life cycle so far. But I am now at this fork in the road again where I have to decide what adventure to pursue next. Do I want to stay in this IC role, or do I want to pursue a management position? Because one of the reasons I got into tech in the first place was that you can move up without being a people manager. But yet, again, here I am naturally at this crossroads of like, maybe I do want to be a manager. So I'm here to share with you some of the tools that I've been using recently to help guide me in one direction or the other, or, spoiler alert, a little bit of both. So let's talk about how to map it out. So the main career track options that I'm going to talk about today are the IC, the individual contributor. A great option if you have no interest in being a people leader, if you love being in the weeds of technical challenges, and you just like to get your tickets done and think about those complex problems in a technical world. People manager role is a good option if you're passionate about leading, if you want to make an impact at your company on the people level, if you are passionate about helping lift other folks up in their careers and advocate for them. And then there's this hybrid role. So the hybrid role can look like a lot of different things depending on the company, depending on the size of the company, the age of the company. It could be a tech lead on your team where you're the subject matter expert for the product that your team owns. It could look like mentorship while still being an IC, but still taking on some like leader capabilities without specifically being a manager. And then there's the split roles. So I've seen some split roles at different companies where the expectation might be that you're a people leader 75% of the time, and you get to spend 25% of your time still writing code. Obviously, that number and ratio can vary from place to place, but they're out there. So the hybrid role is the route that I've chosen for myself for now, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later. So let's talk about resources. Disclaimer, again, I don't have dedicated slides for every one of these resources. Some of them I do. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. So you'll get a sneak peek of my dogs during one of these slides. All right, so the IDP, which stands for your individual development plan. In my experience, this is something that you work closely with your manager on. Apologies for the kind of small print on this one, but this is just kind of a basic template of what an IDP could look like. This is mine from 2022. You participate in setting goals for yourself, career goals, short-term and long-term. So think about where you want to be in 12 to 18 months or like 1.5 to 3 years. You can address what you know your strengths and your opportunities are so that you can lay it out and identify where you might want to put more effort into building your competencies. And then you can plan out these critical behaviors or goals, very much treated like SMART goals. So they're measurable, time-based. There's ways that you can track them with your manager to work towards those larger career goals. So you might notice on mine specifically, I left the 3 to 5 year mark blank. Uh, when I see forms like this, it's really easy for me to think in black and white that like I have to fill out every field, but like I barely know like who I'm going to be as a person in like 1 to 2 years, let alone what it is that I want to be doing in my career in 3 to 5 years. So I leave that blank, right? It can very much be like a take what serves you and leave what doesn't. So um, but this time, or in April of last year, when I was filling out this IDP, my 1.5 to 3 year goal was to work towards senior engineer. And so my critical behaviors and goals were doing things that would help me move in that direction based on some of the expectations of the company where I currently work. So that's another way to kind of build out what your IDP could be. So the second resource is just to apply an interview. So this is one where I don't have a dedicated image. So here are my dogs, Jackson on the left and Lydia on the right. They're just here for moral support. So with the application and interview process, I think we've probably all heard of the phrase, like, you don't know what you don't know. And something that is a really big thing that gets exposed when you go through the application and interview process for a position that you might be considering. So you can just go for it. You can apply for the job and get through the interview process and see what you learn throughout that journey, throughout those conversations with folks. That can really open your eyes to details that maybe you weren't aware of before. And it can also maybe help you decide if you even want to do that role or not. This was something that I had the opportunity to do last year at Spreedly. So while I was working towards becoming a senior engineer, there was also an open engineering manager position. And so I went for it. I have management experience, but my previous management experience had kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And so I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back into that. This industry is very different. The company that I'm working for is very different than the places that I was previously when I was in management. But I still had that hesitation of like, I know what this has done to me in the past. It's a slippery slope for me in like my work-life balance. And so when I was going through the interview process, I was very honest with every group of people that I spoke with, that I wasn't actually sure if I wanted the position, but I wanted to go through the experience to learn more about it and ultimately to help me decide if that was an avenue that I wanted to pursue. So I'm going to do a little sidebar with a tip here. If you think you might want a position and you're going to apply and go through the interview process for it, don't tell people that you aren't sure if you actually want the role. So I was going through this interview process at the company where I've been working for like 2.5 years at this point in time. And now I've been there for almost 3.5 years. So like the people that I'm working with and that I got to interview with know me pretty well as a human being. They know that I'm very honest. They know that I don't have much of a filter. So it wasn't surprising for folks for me to be brutally honest in this interview process by saying, like, for the record, I don't actually know if I want this, but I also know that I can learn a lot by going through this process. But they were very gracious in their feedback to me afterwards of like, if you do decide that you want to pursue this in the future, by all means go for it, but like, don't tell everyone that you aren't quite sure if you want it, because they want to put someone in the role that they know really wants it. Otherwise, they're taking a risk at potentially needing to backfill that role again in 6 months. So that was what I learned from my experience. But I still have no regrets of being brutally honest throughout that interview process. So thematics is a really interesting thing and may not be something that you would have expected to hear about during a talk on career development. But show of hands if you aren't quite sure what thematics means, like the context of that. Yeah, cool, sweet. It's something that I just learned about recently, and I was kind of fascinated by it, and I thought it was a really interesting tool to kind of bring into this conversation and consideration for myself. So Um, Somatics, this, we're not going to watch this talk. This is just this slide that shows up from this YouTube link. So Amy Newell gave a talk in Portland in RailsConf of 2022 called Let Your Body Lead. And one of the things that she talked about in this slide, and the kind of like single sentence pitch for somatics, is that you're paying attention to the way to like sensations in your body when you are kind of confronted with a decision or when you're in a certain situation. So it's really just kind of tuning in to sensations in your body. I'm not a mental health professional, so that's where I'll stop my explanation. But if that sounds at all interesting to you, I encourage you to read about it. It's pretty fascinating. So one example that she gave in this talk was to like, okay, you're trying to decide between two things. And we've heard of the like, let's flip a coin to like make a decision. So her thing was, okay, think about something you're trying to make a decision on. Don't make it so extreme of like, should I like relocate to another country for this job? That's a little too extreme for this. So let's bring it down. Let's bring it back to like, maybe you're trying to decide between two places for lunch. This will be a simple example to give. And she's going to say, okay, option one, we're going to designate to heads on the coin. And option two, we're going to dedicate to tails on the coin. All right, so assign your options to heads or tails. And then I'm going to flip the proverbial coin and make this decision. And the coin says tails. Okay, so in that moment, when you flip this coin and you see what the coin has decided for you, what was your immediate mental thought when that happened? Or like, how did that feel in your body? So if I said, okay, tails, you have to go with option two, if your instant gut reaction was like, oh man, like I kind of wanted, I was really leaning more towards option one, great. Like that's a piece of information that now like, oh, I guess I was leaning more towards option one when maybe I thought I was pretty neutral between the two. Or if option two was the one where you're like, sweet, that was actually the one that I wanted, then it's like, great, then like you did have a preference between those two options. And so you can just use that exercise as just some additional information in helping you make a decision. But I thought that was really interesting, right? To think about like when you're trying to decide between two things, chances are you aren't completely neutral, even if you think you are. And so this is an interesting way of just, you don't have to listen to what the coin says, but think about how you thought about that decision or how you felt about that decision when the coin, I say this in quotes, when the coin made the decision for you. So pros and cons list. We love a tangible list, pen and paper. You can use online tools like Miro board. My therapist loves to tell me to write things down, journal about something, write lists to justify or validate decisions if that is something that speaks to you, that helps you. Another reason that I love writing things down is that it allows me to slowly process things at my own pace, and it gives me something to come back to like multiple times and kind of reiterate on that processing and on that consideration. So you might be trying to think about two different career options, right? Management or IC. You could be writing down what some of the advantages, benefits, or impact on your future might be for each of those positions, what your cons might be, risks, challenges, impact on others, right? And some examples of that, right? Like for management, a pro for that would be that there's like generally going to be a pay increase, but that's also a pro if you want to stay in IC and just pursue the next level. A risk of going into management is that, simply stated, there's more IC roles out there than there are management roles. It's just the nature of the beast. Like there's a ratio of more contributors than managers. It is what it is. But you also have to think about like how that impacts your emotional energy or mental energy, like what fills your cup, things like that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Mentorship. So I could probably talk about mentorship for a while. The great thing is that there are a lot of conference talks about mentorship. I'm really passionate about it. I do it both in and outside of my current company. If you don't have a mentor or you're not mentoring someone and you want that to change, please reach out to me. I love talking to folks about how to kind of kick off that process. Adam Cuppy is also a person who does a lot of mentorship talks at Ruby Central conferences. And so he gave one recently, earlier this year in Atlanta at RubyConf called Mentorship in 3 Acts that was really solid. Ruby Central in general has done what seems like a very intentional push to include more mentorship related talks in their conferences in the last couple of years. So their YouTube channel is full of mentorship related content, which I'm really loving. So the TLDR on mentorship is that mentorship can look like a lot of different things. It depends on the level of commitment that you have, but it's very much not a one size fits all, and that's really great. Oh, I realized I forgot to change my slide for this one because I love to just rant about mentorship. A lot of people have been using AI to generate like great slides and content for presentations lately, and I have not figured that out yet. But I felt like this was too good to not show. So the quote, "one animal mentoring another animal in the style of the Muppets" was the prompt that I gave an AI like image generator, and this was what I got out. And I just thought it was really silly, so I wanted to include it. But all of that to say, I am of the belief that you're never too green to be a mentor, no matter where you are in your career stage. If you have learned something, that means that you have something to contribute to someone else. So if you're interested in being a mentor, but you feel like maybe you're not quite ready, it's not true. You are ready. You can do it. So anybody can be a mentor, and there are a lot of tools and resources out there to kind of guide folks and provide templates for what that could look like. So yeah, mentorship. Mentorship is a really great way to take on that like leadership role without being a people manager, right? Because like leader and manager are two very different things. But this is one way that you can kind of stay in IC, take on some leadership responsibilities, or like help lead others in their tech career while still writing code and not being a people manager. So, build relationships. So let's talk about the joys of networking, right? So if you follow folks on LinkedIn and you see someone that has a role that you're interested in or you're curious about, send them a message. You can ask them questions. You can pick their brain about what their experience was like, or find out, if it's someone in a management role, find out what their transition was like from IC to manager. General networking, the boot camp that I went through would always tell us like humans hire humans. And so networking was really emphasized throughout that process of doing the job hunt. So lots of different networking opportunities in the tech world. These are some of the ones that have impacted me the most. Being able to find local meetup groups so that I can go chat with people in person, but in like a low pressure way. So there's meetups for all sorts of interest groups. So I encourage you, if you're looking to do some in-person meetups with other folks with similar interests. I've also noticed that a lot of the quote unquote like nerd communities are like, there's a lot of overlap, right? So in my town, there's a lot of like board game meetups, and a lot of the people in board game meetups are also in the tech industry. So that's also been an interesting, unexpected way to do some networking for me. But yeah, talking to folks, asking them questions, picking their brains. I would also say that if you've reached out to someone on LinkedIn to ask them questions and they haven't responded and like some time has gone by, but you're still really interested in talking to them, or let's say you're really interested in the company that they work for, don't be afraid to follow up with people. I'm personally a space cadet, so if someone has ever messaged me and I didn't respond, it's likely that I read it and then got immediately distracted with something else, and I'm not the best at going back to things like that. So while I might be organized, I'm still definitely a space cadet. So feel free to follow up with folks gently, And then if more time goes by and you don't hear from them, maybe reach out to a different contact at that company if that's a networking opportunity that you are really feeling like you want to pursue. So a Women Who Code meetup in my area was actually what led me to meet the very first manager that I had in the tech industry. And so that holds a very like near and dear place to my heart, because that was like the community group that really launched me into my tech career. So I always love to talk about that one. Okay, and then your own experiences, right? So like all the resources in the world may not help you if you don't take a good hard look at yourself and your own experiences alongside all of these tools and resources. Some of them might apply to you, all of them might apply to you. It's possible that none of them might apply to you. I feel like IDPs probably apply to everybody though. So, but anyways, like assessing your own habits, know yourself, be honest with yourself, right? I had to assess that I'm not the great at maintaining a work-life balance when I'm in a management role. I had a really hard time turning off that emotional empathy at the end of the day. So when I was in management, that was something that I was carrying home with me even after I was signed off. So my brain didn't get to disconnect and have that space. So also addressing like the things that excite you. Do you like being in meetings? Do you like socializing with other people at your organization? Or do you prefer to squash bugs? I love moving a ticket across the Jira board. That is like so validating for me to be able to move something into done and get to move on to my next task. And things like that are a little bit harder when you're in management. If you know that you don't like meetings and you're constantly wishing that you had fewer meetings on your schedule, like management just might not be for you. But there are ways that you can be a leader without being a people manager. So just be honest about what excites you and chase that in your work. All right, so let's talk about some potential roadblocks. I don't have individual slides for this. Many of them could be their own talk. I'm just gonna give you like 1 or 2 sentences on each one here. So lack of opportunity, I mentioned this already, right? There are more IC roles out there than there are manager roles. It's the nature of the beast. So if you know that you want to pursue management and you don't want to change companies, you might just have to wait for a role to open up. Or if you're comfortable changing companies, that's another thing that you might just have to consider as far as opportunities go. So social anxiety is a big one. Like know how many spoons you have each day and what the cost of the different tasks and things might be. If you aren't familiar with spoon theory, that's what I'm referencing when I talk about like know how many spoons you have. There's a fun Wikipedia page on it if you wanted to know more about that. Lack of mentorship. If you know that mentorship is important to you, like be sure that you're building a relationship with a mentor. If your job doesn't give you that, you can find one elsewhere. You can find one through WNB. You can find one through Women Who Code. There are lots of other community opportunities out there to seek mentorship if that is something that's important to you. Lack of representation. This is very much one that should be its own talk at some point. This lack of representation can be made lighter through mentorship, but it's still a very real problem in this industry. This is still a white male dominated industry, but there are community groups out there, this being one of them as a wonderful example, WNB. Decision fatigue. We touched on this a bit at the beginning, right? But it's real. There was a while where I could not decide what I wanted to do with my life, and that had me like frozen. I did not know how to move forward. I felt like I had to decide between these two things. And that's not true, right? I found that there is that middle ground and I refused to stay frozen. So figured out how to move forward from that decision fatigue. And then lack of support, right? It can be lonely sometimes when you get a job and you're kind of building that new internal network. But hopefully you are able to find that in your peers, in your immediate team members. And then if you feel like you're lacking that still, know that you have this wonderful community of people to stand by you and that you're never alone. All right, so looking ahead, I've shared my journey. If it feels at all familiar to you, I hope that it gives you hope that you're not alone in like this unknown. We've gone over some of the resources, some of the potential roadblocks you might have encountered or might encounter in your future. I'm personally pursuing that hybrid role, like I talked about. I did get that promotion to senior engineer, which I was really excited about. And so I'm still focusing on developing myself as an IC in that technical role, while also taking on things like mentorship and being the subject matter expert for some of the products that my team owns within my company. And those are just the things that fill my cup right now. And it's really great to be in that space. So what can you do with this, right? So what do you want to be when you grow up? Or at least when you grow up like 6 months from now or a year from now, right? What do you want to be doing? What drives you? I'm also going to go off on a little side tangent and say that I am someone that believes your passion does not have to be what you do for 40 hours a week. That was something that was really pushed on me to do when I was getting my art degree in ceramics, right? People thought, oh, if you're passionate about this, then like I expect that this is what you want to do when you graduate. And it wasn't. Sometimes when you decide to pursue your passion as your full-time job, it can also lead to burnout, right? It can take some of the fun out of it when you put that monetary challenge on it. So I'm a firm believer in that your job should not be soul sucking, but it also doesn't have to be like the thing that drives your life. It's okay if it is, but it doesn't have to be if you don't want it to be, right? Yeah, so dig deep, figure that out. Connect with peers, leaders that you look up to, strangers on the internet. There are so many of us. Ask questions, explore what's out there. You might learn that there's something out there that you hadn't considered for yourself, and then go for it. And know that you can change your mind. Realizing that and accepting that for myself has been so freeing to me. Going back to that decision fatigue, it has saved my anxious brain to know that a choice that I make today to pursue growing as an IC, as an individual contributor, and growing my technical knowledge, if in 6 months I'm like, you know what, I really actually now I feel called to like dive into management, I can change my mind. I can do that. And the things that I've spent time growing myself in personally right now are only going to help and support me in that future decision. So it's great. And in the fine words of Moira Rose, rock onwards and upwards. You are radiant. And even though a lot of this stuff is hard, just remember, like, you can do hard things. So that's it. Thank you so much.